In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
So today, hopefully, we're going to finish up our study on cosmologies. We're going to look at three in particular that have the common thread in that they try to marry, or they try to explain some of the phenomenon that we've discussed in the class that makes gives evidence that the universe is old. That's kind of the common denominator that they all have in one form or the other. And we've looked at the evidences of an old universe, the expansion of the universe, the abundance of light elements in the universe. We've looked at the time travel problem, and then we looked at the cosmologic radiation, cosmotic background radiation, and those are evidences of an old universe. And these try to look at that science and make Genesis jive. That's what their common denominator is. That's what we'll do today, and hopefully we'll get through that today. And then next week we'll be looking at evidences of design within the universe. And we'll spend probably 2 or 3 classes on that, at least 2, I'm sure, but 2 or 3. So the first one, and these are things I've kind of ran across in my studies, and all of these people have written books, and I'll show you the books that they've written, so if you want to read them, that's certainly something you might want to do. I've tried to condense them. This is a very condensed version of the books that they've written, but it's best I could do in a short period of time to try to get a feeling of what their ideas are. And the first one comes from John Sailhamer from his book Genesis Unbound, and he calls it, sorry I did miss the first slide, but he calls it historical creationism. That's what he calls it. And there's some similarities in these with the gap theory and progressive creationism, and I'll point those out as we go. But this was a very unique view that I have never seen before. Maybe some of you in your class have heard his point of view. And he uses a textual and biblical approach. Sailhamer's not a physicist. He's not an astrophysicist. He is not a scientist. We would call him maybe a theologian, okay? He's a Christian, and he brings that point of view to science in the first book of Genesis. And he looks at this from his studies of the Hebrew words. But again, his point is to try to combine the scientific approach with the biblical approach. So the first book of Genesis, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. For him, that is an indefinite period of time. For him, that verse explains the creation of the entire universe. And that's it. And this could be a long period of time. It can be an indefinite period of time. It could encompass eons and epochs. Genesis 1, verse 2 through the end of chapter 2 then is a much more limited period of time in scope. So it appears at first this is maybe like the gap theory, but it's really not the gap theory, and I'll show you why when we go through this. The land that is being prepared after Genesis 1 is the Fertile Crescent, or the Garden of Eden, or the Promised Land, if you will, that area. And it's the same land, I guess it wouldn't be the absolute Fertile Crescent, but it'd be the area of land that Abraham would be promised. That's Sailhamer's point of view. So God creates a people, he puts them in the land he has promised for them, and he calls on them to worship and obey him and receive his blessings. So after Genesis 1:1, the rest of those 6 days are a literal 6 days. They're literal 24 hours. But Genesis 1:1 can encompass an indefinite period of time. And he looks at this from his point of view by looking at the words and what the words in Hebrew means. Now, this is this is his point of view. His hypothesis enables us to live in peace with the findings of modern science. So if you took his point of view, then Genesis 1:1 could encompass, again, eons, millions, billions of years of time. And here's where he gets some of this. He looks at the words in Hebrew, and he looks at what their actual meanings are. And the word reshet means a beginning. It doesn't mean start. It means a beginning, and that's a key for him. And it can mean a long period of time. It does not mean an absolute start. So when the word in the beginning, it means the beginning of everything and encompasses a long period of time. So this beginning allows for long biological eras. In other words, the dinosaurs could have come and gone and become extinct. It encompasses all. He's not a theistic evolutionist. He doesn't believe in evolution per se, but he just believes in long epochs of time and can explain the geologic findings that we see on Earth today. And again, he's this same word to try to prove his point. And he goes to several verses. I'm not going to all of them because I want to get through this lesson today if I can. But this word, reshit, reshit, is also used in the book of Jeremiah. When you go to Jeremiah 28, verse 1, it talks about the reign of Zedekiah. You may have heard this before. But when you look at the reign of Zedekiah, the reign of Zedekiah is talking about over 4 years of events that occurred, but it starts with in the beginning of his reign. But it's not talking about the absolute first day of his reign. It's talking about, in that particular verse, the first 4 years of the reign. So from that point then, the word beginning does not have to mean the starting point. It can mean a period of time. And the word is used that way in the Old Testament and in other passages. There is a Hebrew word for start. This is there's actually two Hebrew words for start, Rashana and Tekala. And so when those words are used for something that has an absolute beginning, in the book of Genesis and the Old Testament, those are the words that are used. Also, Genesis 1, the first 5. If you've got a King James or a New King James version, I'm just going to turn to that and read it. I'm going to read it. Who has a King James or a New King James version? Could you read verse 5 for me?
Okay, this is out of New King James.
Okay.
God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
Right. Well, the word first is inserted. That's not in the original translation. And I'll read the same verse from the New American Standard. The New American Standard says, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning one day." So and the word first is inserted. So once again, from Selhammer's point of view, it's not necessarily talking the first day in time. He's talking about the first day of what he's doing on that first week. And the word was added. The word first was added by the translators. The concept of formless and void. So he explains everything. And again, I'm not going to have time to do that today. Every day he explains how that relates to what he believes that first week was, which was again the preparation of the land for God's people. So what does the word formless and void? Because he says the earth was formless and void after the verse 5 and verse 6. Formless and void can be better translated empty and nothing, and can convey the idea of wilderness or uninhabitable. And again, this same word is used in Jeremiah 4:23 through 26. And if you go to, we're not going to turn to that, don't have time to do it, but if you want to turn to that later on, you'll see that seems to be conveying the concept of wilderness, uninhabitable land. And that's what the word formless and void actually can be interpreted. So the land that was being promised to God's people at that point was uninhabitable, in other words. It wasn't formless and void in the sense that it wasn't there or had no substance to it. It was just wilderness and had not been inhabited yet. So day one is not the beginning of time, but it's the beginning of the week of God's preparation of the promised land. That's what Selhammer's point of view is. What does let there be light mean? Let there be light is simply the first sunrise. You have your first day that he has promised, God's promised land, and when he says let there be light, then light, that means let there be sunrise. Again, similar verses, similar use of the word in Genesis 44:3, Nehemiah 8:3, and Exodus 10:23. So it's not the creation of light in Selhammer's point of view. He's just saying, let there be light. Let the sunlight come up. The expanse, what's the expanse that we read about in Genesis? It's clouds, rakia. And rakia is used for clouds in Proverbs 28:28. And this is a key. And two of these cosmologies that we're going to look at today, this is key. It's actually key in every cosmology, even for us to try to explain day 4. Day 4 is always a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because you got day and night, evening and morning being talked about, yet you don't have the sun being talked about till when? Day 4. So day 4 is always a little bit of a problem when you're trying to explain the book of Genesis, no matter which point of view you take. So what he is saying in day 4, on day 4, let's turn to your book, Bibles, on verse 14 there. I'm going to read verse 14 and 15. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate day from night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens, and to give light on earth and to us. And God, I'll go to 16, and God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth. So those verses are talking about the sun, the moon, the stars, all the things that we see in the heavens. And so how can that be, from Sailhamer's point of view, if all of that was created in the first day? Well, it can be that because they were for signs and for seasons, and they were to mark those things for mankind. And that would have been marked on that particular day, on day 4. In day 5, God created bara. Bara is the word for create. It makes a big difference between the word for create and the word made. And those words are used differently in the book of Genesis. He created living animals for the promised land on day 5. Now, what would that mean? These are the domesticated animals. These are the animals that are going to inhabit the promised land. I'm not agreeing with him. I'm just telling you what he says, okay? This is his point of view. And at least it makes sense with his use of the words. He tries to justify this from a biblical standpoint and from the use of the words that are in the book of Genesis. And then finally, of course, on day 6, he created mankind and placed them in the garden. And so therefore, if you look at his theology, if you look at his cosmology, and you look at the genealogies are going to be accurate, because day 6 then begins the start of this week. And from that point on, you have mankind that's on the scene. And we know that we can go back, the book of Genesis and try to calculate how old the earth is from the genealogies, and it's only several thousand, 10,000, 12,000, depending on what years you want to use. But it's only thousands of years, not millions of years, and that would make sense in this particular theology. How about Exodus 20 and 11? We looked at that. David brought it up last week. How about that? Well, again, go to Exodus 20 and 11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So from Sailhamer's point of view, the reading isn't God created the heavens and the earth, but God made heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them in 6 days. So that 6 days is the preparation of the promised land, not the creation of the cosmos. If you combine heavens and earth, that's an expression for the cosmos, and that's what was used in verse 1. All right, any questions on that? That's his point of view. I'm just giving you his point of view. And he tries to, what I applaud him for is at least he's using biblical words, biblical points of view, not scientific, but it's this attempt to marry the two together. Well, let's look at White-Hole cosmology. We looked at this already a little bit. We're going to get in a little bit more detail today. White-Hole cosmology was developed by Russell Humphreys, who has a PhD in astrophysics, and he from LSU. That's where his PhD is from, and he taught there, I believe. He's not teaching now. He's now working with another organization, Creation Institute. That's not right. It's one of the others. Maybe Answers in Genesis. But anyway, he wrote a book, Starlight and Time. Very brilliant man, very bright guy. So he is a scientist. And he looked at the problem of the light time travel. So what I've put on there is a picture from a telescope of Alpha Centauri. Ever heard of Alpha Centauri? They are the closest stars secondary to the sun that we have. Actually, Alpha Centauri, if you look at them with the naked eye, look like one sun. And there's actually 3 of them. There's an Alpha, and there's a Beta, and there's one called Proxima. And we don't show the Proxima here, but the Alpha Centauri, the point of showing this slide is that those are the closest suns closest stars that we have to our solar system, to our sun. How far away are they? They're, I didn't have that on there, but they're actually only several light years away. What? 4.5 light years away. 4.5 light years away. Well, hey, that's not too bad, only 4.5. That's 4.5 light years. How long would the light have to have come to man in Genesis 1:1? 2 days? It was built, the heavens were created on the 4th day. Man was created on the 6th day. The heavens were created so that man could have them for signs and seasons and so forth. So you've only got 2 days for the light to get here, not 4.5 years, and that's the closest suns that we have. So there is a problem with the light time travel enigma that we've talked about in this class. Now, this is a telescope view of other galaxies. And galaxies with other stars are millions of light years away, in some cases billions of light years away. So what does that imply? That implies that it took millions or billions of years for that light to get here. So if the earth was created in a literal 6 days, how could the light get here if the stars are billions of light years or even 100 light years away or even a 1 light year away? It takes a year for it to get here, not days. And like I say, this is looking at the Flamingo 2 telescope images show part of the Swan Nebula, and this particular nebula is 4,200 light years away. But there are other suns and galaxies that are millions of light years away. Well, the young creationists have a dilemma, don't they? So how is it explained? The 3 most popular explanations for how we can have light years so far away and yet we're seeing them and the earth was created in a literal 6 days are these 3 that I have on the board here. One is that the measurements are wrong. We simply don't know how to measure how far those stars are. Well, I'm going to dismiss that real quick because that's not right. That doesn't work. We've got good measurements. So it isn't a problem with mankind's measurements. The measurements are accurate. So then you have the mature creation approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you have the Setterfield hypothesis. And the Setterfield hypothesis created by Mr. Setterfield, and he says that light traveled at a much faster time in the past, an infinite speed. So if time traveled at an infinite speed, then you could have it here in 1 or 2 days, couldn't you? That's his point of view. Let's look at the mature creation approach first. Like I say, we're going to dismiss the first one because I don't think that just doesn't fly. So what does the mature creation approach say? It's the approach that you've seen many times, and that is, especially when you look at the creation of the earth, but it also, this approach is used in the creation of the universe, and that is that God created the universe and the earth in a mature state. There seems to be some validity to that. Certainly when Adam was created, we don't see Adam in a cradle. Adam seemed to be created fully mature, and all the other animals were probably created fully mature. But we're talking about the universe right now. We're talking about the stars, the galaxies, and those sort of things. So from this approach, then the universe was created in a mature state. So that mature state then means that the light would just be here. It was already there, it was mature. Man's here, it's mature, light would be there. But for that to occur, you have to think about it. Now, I like to think about stuff. I just don't want to say, oh, that's the way it happened. But think about it. How could that be? Well, if that's the case, then not only were the stars created mature, but the light that has come from the stars would have to be created mature. I'm not saying it couldn't happen that way, but that's what would have had to have happened. So not just the stars were created, but the very light that we're seeing. In other words, the light would have to be created, as Danny Faulkner says, in transit. I don't know how you would explain it any other way. Does that make sense? It can make sense, but there's a few problems with that. If you're going to take that approach, you got to think about what you're saying, and you got to see what the problems are with that. At first, it sort of questions whether there's even a reality of the stars. If the light can come from them in transit, maybe all we're seeing is the light. And there are no stars. But Genesis said God created the stars, not the light from the stars. So that doesn't work. The other one then ignores the other qualities of the stars. So when we look at stars, we can measure other things of the stars besides just their light. And by measuring those things, that means the stars appear to be real. Things like the temperatures, the composition, and other things of stars have been measured, and they seem to be accurate. And Danny Faulkner and Humphreys realized that those measurements are accurate as well. So it's certainly not a satisfying explanation to me to say that it was just all created in a mature state. How about the Setterfield hypothesis? Once again, Setterfield went and looked at measurements of light. And he went back a long time and looked at how the measurements of light were. And in the past, the measurements of light were faster than what we're measuring today. Since 1960, though, that hasn't changed. Why do you think that might be? Well, it's because we can measure time better now. It's not a function of the change of the speed of light. It's a function of the way we've been able to measure light more accurately. That's what I believe. And so the Setterfield hypothesis had gained some ground amongst creationists, but I don't think it's a very satisfying explanation either, to be honest with you. There's a consistency, a constancy of light. And that seems to be true of God's laws, doesn't it? Name me one law that we have discovered and we feel that law to be accurate that has changed. I mean, gravity hasn't changed. Still there. Doesn't seem to have changed. All the other electrophysical laws that we have looked at don't change. So why would the speed of light change? It's not to me, it's not likely that happened. But that's a hypothesis, and if that's true, if the speed of light is infinite, then it certainly would encompass a short creation week. So what does the white hole cosmology do? Well, it tries again to explain this phenomenon, and yet from a creationist point of view, and from an astrophysicist point of view. And for the white hole cosmology to work, first relativity has to be accurate, it has to be valid. And we're talking about, and primarily here, general relativity, the relativity that Einstein developed that explained gravity. And the second thing is the cosmologic principle is flawed. What's the cosmologic principle? Cosmologic principle is also known as the Copernicus principle, same thing, and that is that there is no center of the universe. There is no center, and there's nothing special about Earth. Earth is just part of the universe and nothing special about it. So for this cosmology to work, those two things have to be accurate. And we've already looked at the concept of time and this fact that time is not absolute. And I think this is a problem that's really hard to grasp for us. Even though I've talked about it several times in this class, it is a problem that is hard for us to grasp because we have an idea that 24 hours is 24 hours here, anywhere else in space. It's 24 hours. It's a clock. It goes 24 hours. And if you had a clock here and you had a clock somewhere else, it would go 24 hours. But it would go 24 hours relative to the person, the observer at that spot. This has been shown to occur here on Earth. We look at time that is measured in Greenwich, England, versus the Bureau of Times in Boulder, Colorado, and their clocks are different. The clock in Boulder runs a little bit faster. I'll grant you it's not a lot. It's 5 microseconds. And the Greenwich time is 5 microseconds slower, but it's real. Well, you can say, well, it's a problem with clocks. Clocks just don't work the same when they're in high altitude. That's not it. These are atomic clocks. That's not it. It's a function of time. So when you're in a higher altitude, and they've done these with planes as well that circumnavigate the Earth. So there is a difference in time, and time is not absolute. So these effects, you have to remember, don't only apply to the clocks, they apply to us. Aging processes, physical processes will be different depending on where you are relative to space and time. And Russell Humphreys is a young Earth creationist. This isn't coming from someone else. So for the math to work, quote unquote, the Earth must be the center of the universe in his white hole cosmology. And so Russell Humphreys says that the universe was created inside a white hole event horizon. White holes are different than black holes. If you got near the event horizon and black hole, you wouldn't survive that because you'll never get there. But if you could, you'd be sucked in and you'd never come out. And all kinds of weird things physically happen at the edge of a black hole. White hole are the opposite. Things come out of a white hole. We don't see white holes anymore. It's a theoretical concept. But physicists believe there were white holes, not just creationists. So the Earth and the universe were created inside a white hole from Russell Humphrey's white hole cosmology. And all white holes are gone. That white hole is gone now, as are all white holes. And what happens in the white hole cosmology is that time effectively stands still at the event horizon. You understand what an event horizon is? It's the edge, I guess is the best way I can describe it, of a black hole or a white hole. And when you're on the edge of that hole, the time effectively stands still. So according to Russell Humphreys, if you were standing on the Earth as the event horizon arrived, distant objects in the universe could age billions of years in a single day of your time. Does that at least sort of make a little sense? So are they 1 billion years old or are they not 1 billion years old? They're 1 billion years old, but they did it in one day. It's not contradictory if you believe relativity. It's not contradictory. So, one more time. There's a couple of assumptions that both a Big Bang theory and a white hole cosmology make. And both of these assumptions are strictly assumptions. There's no way of proving either one. The Big Bang says the universe is unbound and there's no center. It's just assumed. It's an assumption. There's no boundaries. It's unbound. White hole cosmology says the opposite. The universe is bound and has a center. And you can choose which one you're going to believe because neither one can never be proved. There's a difference, of course. Both are unprovable, but at least the white hole hypothesis, from my point of view, can fit biblically. It can fit biblically. All right. We're going to spend a little more time now on another cosmology called Genesis and the Big Bang. This is Gerald Schroeder. I think I mentioned this. I think Danny Cecil referred me to this book years ago. And it's kind of a different approach too. A little bit of progressive creationism here. But we'll look at Dr. Schroeder. Dr. Schroeder, brilliant man, MIT trained physicist. He now teaches over in Israel. So he is a scientist, but he's Hebrew, he's Jewish. Comes from a Jewish point of view, not a Christian point of view, but when you look at Genesis, the point of view is basically the same. And he bases his on a combination of both scholarship and science, unlike Selhammer's. And he says that Genesis 1 is in complete harmony with science. Complete harmony. This is his quote. The biblical narrative and the scientific account of our Genesis are two mutually compatible descriptions of the same identical reality. And his approach is going to look at the idea of absolute time as well. And here's the essence of his theory. Objects observed in the past depend on the relation of the observer and the observed. Once again, time is not absolute. This is a true phenomenon. We know it to be true. So how this is applied as a theory? Well, his theory is God was the reference when the universe was very young. Then man's reference occurs and the universe looks very old. So from God's reference point, from where he's quote unquote seeing things, the earth is very young. From man's reference point, it is very old. So until Adam appeared on day 6, God alone was watching the clock. That's his theory. So the point is, who would be watching the clock before day 6? Well, it wouldn't be man. He wasn't around. But in this theory, you got to have to impart somewhat personal and physical attributes to God. So God's sort of quote unquote watching the clock. And the universe contains billions of cosmic clocks, each ticking at its own locally correct time, and we've shown that enough. That's just a picture of a wonderful picture from the Hubble telescope here. And these are all galaxies. These aren't stars. These are galaxies. Billions of galaxies that have been seen through the Hubble telescope. So at the moment of Adam, God and man's clock were now synchronized. So similar to Selhammer's a little bit. So when man was created, now the genealogies are going to be correct, according to Schroeder. So the genealogies of Genesis then would be accurate. So in Genesis 1:1, that's the Big Bang. So he's a scientist, and his point of view is that the Genesis 1:1 is the Big Bang. The phrase evening and morning, according to Dr. Schroeder, can better be characterized as disorder, evening, and order, morning. Disorder being entropy. And then morning being order. So every morning something changed. God imparted a little bit of more order to the universe. And he certainly believes in a creator. He certainly believes that the universe is fine-tuned. I'm talking about Dr. Schroeder. So order is highly structured, disorder is entropy or chaos. And so Dr. Schroeder, though not precisely a theistic evolutionist, he would say that evolution occurred nonetheless, and it was directed by God. How about the soul? Well, the soul was placed there by God in man at about 5,700 years ago, according to Schroeder. Now, again, this goes a lot like now the progressive creationist. And he said this represented a quantum change. So what was mankind before the soul was placed? He would be an animal. He would be a hominid or whatever until he developed to a point where God could place the soul in him. How about day 4? Here we go again. How about day 4? What about day 4? Day 4, light was created on day 1, but it was translucent, but it was transparent. The clouds and other things obscured the vision from the light from the earth, and that's how, in that sense, it was created. And he goes back and he looks at the moon. He looks at the moon and saying, now things are being created from a man's perspective versus God. And the verse that we looked at earlier in this class said that there was 2 luminaries. There was 2 things that were created to shine on the earth. One was the sun, one was the moon. Isn't that what we read? That's what the moon looks like on a full moon. And we had a beautiful full moon a few weeks ago. Kind of looked that bright. Looks to be shining, doesn't it? It's not shining. And it's not radiating light. It's reflecting light. So if you looked at the moon, we looked for a slide last night that would try to show that, and this is kind of the best we could come up with. But if you were looking at the moon from outer space, would it be reflecting light? Would you be able to see it reflecting light? Probably not. And this is a sort of an idea of what it might look like. It's not bright and white anymore. So when the luminaries were placed there, they were placed there for man's perspective, but not because the moon is necessarily a luminary. So luminaries on day 4 are now visible and set now for seasons. And that's what the scripture says too, doesn't it? It says that they were for seasons and for signs, but they would look different from space. I threw this in here too because this is an actual picture. Anybody want to venture a guess on what planet this is?
Jupiter.
Yeah, it's Jupiter. Jupiter has multiple moons. I don't know which moon that is, but that little dot there is the moon. It doesn't shine light if you're looking at it from a telescope. It doesn't reflect light even. So man shares common ancestry by evidence by similarity in genetic material. Well, we beat this to a dead pulp in the last class, didn't we? Man, what does common ancestry, or what does common genetic material, similar genetic material prove? Proves a common designer, not evolution. And that's where I think Schroeder really misses the boat, really big time. So how would I characterize his approach? One more time, I want to make it clear. He is saying that the Genesis 1:1, similar to Cellhammer, Genesis 1:1 is the immediate creation and can incorporate eons of time, and then thereafter until man, and this is different from Cellhammer, until man is created on day 6. These can incorporate eons of time. Once man is created on day 6, in his point of view, creation of man is man having the soul placed in him. And when this happens, then the clock literally ticks, and now we have quote unquote real time. So how would I characterize this? I think his relativistic time has some merit. I mean, that has some merit because we've looked at it before. But God transcends time. He transcends space. Therefore, where would his reference point be? You see what I'm saying? I don't know where he would put God's reference point. Where is God right now? He's in heaven. Where's that? We think heaven is up, but is that where heaven is? That's where the heavens are. The heavens is a different place that I think we have no concept of where it can be. Maybe it's a different dimension, but it certainly, you don't see God in a reference point. But if he did, he would certainly see time differently than we do because he transcends time. So that is his theory in a nutshell on the concept of relativistic time, and the rest of his theory is basically progressive creationism. I don't know if I have time to do this, but I want to give you kind of my thoughts on how do you put all this together? Because we've looked at a whole lot. And how do you put all this together? What does it mean? Well, first of all, I believe in the cosmology that's presented in Genesis. Okay, when God said he created the earth in 6 days, he created the earth in 6 days. But yet the universe does appear to be older than 10,000 years old. It appears that way to me. So there has to be some way as far as explaining that. The lifetime travel enigma is difficult to explain from the creation points of view that we looked at, except for the white hole cosmology. That one to me makes some sense. But the other ones don't fit from a scientific point of view. We have to try to explain the light time travel phenomenon. We also have to look at cosmic background and expanding the universe and the abundance of light elements. Those can be explained a little bit more easily. Probably the most difficult is the cosmic background radiation. But if all those place, that would make sense in the white hole cosmology to me, because if the white hole cosmology was correct, you would be receiving all of that cosmic background radiation from the things that were created on that first day, the universe. Now, you could certainly choose to ignore the science. You could just say, I don't care. I don't care what the science says. God said he created the earth in 6 days, and he created the earth in 6 days. And that's absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with that. That doesn't work for me, though. It may work for other people. It doesn't work for me real good because it ignores the science. But if that's there's nothing wrong with that. And I want to just quickly turn to 1 Corinthians 1, verse 18. Because man thinks he's real smart, right? And I'll have to finish this up next week because I know I'm not going to have time to finish this up. But I want to at least give some food for thought. But turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 18. Now, in this particular verse, he's not talking about the creation of the universe, but he's talking about the difference between man's wisdom and God's wisdom. And verse 18 says, For the word of the cross is to those perishing foolishness, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? So God's wisdom is infinitely superior to man's wisdom. And so I will skip down to verse 22. For indeed Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach God, the Christ crucified, to Jews a stumbling block and to Gentiles foolishness. So just because man thinks he knows everything, we really don't. But I'm going to finish this up. I do want to spend a little bit of time on it so you'll at least know what my perspective is to try to look at all these phenomena that we've looked at.